Hi, everybody. Welcome to this new year and also this next webinar. The title of the webinar is New Year, New You. And speaking of New You, we do have an announcement to share before we get started with today's content. We are officially upgrading our name as it is no longer just me at the firm. We are moving from Rachel Christine Consulting to Relicura. And with that is a branding change, website update, email update, etc. But we are very excited about the new name, upgraded branding, etc. But still the same people, same services, and same passions. So please join us in just like a little mini celebration of growing up a little and getting a brand new name. All right, so introduction content. If this is your first webinar with me, I'm Rachel Christine Woody. I am the founder and director of Relicura, and I have 15 plus years in this field, including with archives, museums, and cultural heritage institutions. And in addition to being a business owner and running this firm, and being a special services consultant, I am also an author, speaker, and a people first advocate. A little bit of housekeeping before we dive into the actual content. A link to this recording and a link to all of the resources being mentioned will be shared with you via email to everyone who registered. So if you're attending this premiere, you'll get a link in 24 hours with the recording link and all of the good resources. And as we're going through this webinar in premiere mode, all of the resource links will be also shared in the chat, which I think should be in this direction. This session is pre-recorded so that I can deliver the maximum amount of information to you and then be able to also address any follow-up thoughts or questions that are happening in the chat box while we're in premiere mode. And also, please feel free to share your stories, your own examples, resources, that you may have, and any questions that may come up for you as we're going through this webinar. We are using the YouTube platform for this webinar, so in order to participate in chat, YouTube will require that you sign into it. So you can contribute that way, or if you'd like to send me an email with your questions afterwards, then I also welcome that. The video for this webinar, it can be expanded. As I mentioned, we're using the YouTube player, so all of the typical YouTube video functionality exists, including expansion, closed captioning, etc. And then please just remember to respect that this content is my own intellectual property and subject to copyright. In terms of contents, we are just about concluding this introduction phase. And then we're going to go through a few different areas of when we think about New Year, New You, and in a more specific, helpful way for us in our careers. We'll be talking about reflections to have, going through some thought prompts, how to assess what is currently happening, both for our lives as well as at work, the concept of pruning or deaccessioning, if that's a little easier for your collection brains to think about and implement. We will then have rethinking prompts in terms of, sometimes we just get so into how we're living our lives and our daily routines, we forget to sort of check in and see why we're doing those things. We'll talk about how to protect your assets and what exactly those assets are for you, especially as they're typically intangible in the topic that we're talking about. We will also address how to fortify yourself and fortify your assets, as well as to invest, because everything that we do as an output requires some sort of input, whether it's time, energy, learning, etc. So that's how we're going to frame this conversation today. So jumping right in, the first section is a reflection. So fairly typical of any sort of like new year, new you kind of thing, reflecting what is working, what is not working. So here's some prompts that I want you to think about, and you don't need to come up with answers right away. In fact, I imagine as we go through these together, And as you sort of sit and let your brain grapple with it for a good 24, 48 hours, some of these answers will come to you a few days later. So I encourage you to jot things down if they occur to you now, but also be aware that the impact of these exercises will likely happen over the course of a few days. So just be prepared to jot it down in about 24 to 48 hours as well. All right, so for reflect, what's been on the perpetual to-do list? So items on our to-do list that always seem to languish there, that we never seem to be able to get to, that we're never able to cross off or hand out. What's just been like permanently stuck there for you? What work helps you feel fulfilled? So what is it that actually provides you with motivation, with passion, with satisfaction, those types of things? Because that also helps indicate for you what are priorities in terms of importance, but also in terms of what could help to make you feel more fulfilled during your day. Our next prompt, what work do you avoid or put off? So a bit of that opposite to feeling fulfilled. What do you dread? What are you avoiding? What are you putting off? Because that is an indication of something that is not enjoyable, that is being avoided for a reason. Maybe you don't have all the tools or knowledge that you need to do it. Maybe you need assistance. Maybe it's just not a priority. Being able to identify those different things and either then decide, oh, okay, let's go ahead and do it then, we can problem solve, or maybe we just shouldn't do this at all. Next prompt, how is your schedule and routine working for you? And for this particular one, I tend to struggle with, and so I encourage, if your brain is similar, to once you get locked into a routine, it is so easy to just keep showing up, keep doing the same things, not having a lot of critical thinking and sort of a recommitment to why things are the way they are in our schedules. So I definitely recommend taking a moment to evaluate your schedule, your commitments, and your routine. And is it working for you? Do you need to make some changes? Routine and how we spend our time is something that is going to come up in several of these exercise areas. So we'll definitely dig a little deeper into that one. Next prompt, do you have enough time in the day? So we all have the same amount of time in the day. At least we all should, depending on your reality. But sometimes it feels like there's just never enough time because time is a limited resource. And when that is happening, it means there is a misalignment in all the things that you think you need to do or that you've been tasked to do versus what is actually achievable for you given the amount of hours in the day and specifically in the workday. So having that sort of realization can help then go through specifically in the pruning section of, okay, we know that the demand is not as equal to the actual time available. What sort of pruning do you need to do to make that match up? Next prompt, how does your body feel most days? So for us, again, if your brain is similar to mine, you get locked in that routine every day. It can be really easy to disconnect or disassociate from what your body is actually feeling. And what I have worked on in therapy is trying to learn how to better pay attention to the signals my body gives me when it is not doing well, when it needs more rest, when we are currently doing or engaged in something that is just not emotionally healthy. So checking in with your body, getting a little bit better about paying attention to those signs, because that is another way to help indicate like, oh, I'm feeling really well rested, energized, motivated. You're in good alignment then with what you're doing and what your body and mind need, versus the opposite where you're tired, you're avoidant, you're irritable, you just don't feel well, whether mentally or physically, and that means you're in misalignment. So something is not in a place where it's making you feel good, and that you need to do something about that, whether that's cutting it out or handling it differently. Similar, how does your mental energy feel most days? So are you feeling confident, ready to tackle things? in a pretty good positive mental space, especially when we're thinking about work? Or is it the opposite? And similar to that, body connection, if we are feeling well and if we're feeling not well, both are good to pay attention to so that you can either continue to make good decisions and further invest in those areas, or continue or not continue, hopefully, to be stuck in something that is not making you feel well, whether physically or mentally. And then, of course, sort of bringing those together. So, how are you feeling mentally and emotionally? For some of us, that is the same thing. For others, that is two very different things. But depending on how you identify and speak with and check in with yourself on the inside, making sure that everything, whether by body, mind, heart, or hybrid of those, is feeling good. Because if it is not, then that indicates we need to do some digging in areas to figure out what's going on for you. So, personal example of reflection observations for me personally, and sharing to in case that is helpful for yourself. My body and mind function better when I do have routines in place. So, as soon as I find something's working well for me, that's how I get locked into it. Though with the reminder that I need to reevaluate periodically. But much like younger children or even animals, like having that routine in place, having your body and mind be able to count on when I'm getting rest or when I'm doing some restorative activities is all very helpful to help keep me healthy, not just physically, but also mentally. Also, I need time and space from people to recharge. I am someone who can socialize, but it is exhausting. So, when I am doing work, and especially if it's like on site work with clients, that is so exciting. And I do love that work, but it is also exhausting for me. And so, at the end of the day, and certainly after the on site trip, like I need time away to just recharge from everybody. My body needs a longer period of sleep and a series of regular health appointments. So I am someone who apparently needs like 10 hours of sleep optimally, which is a ridiculous amount of sleep to, in my judgment, but it is what my body seems to need. In at least in its way and how it supports me. So I try and give it at least 8 hours, but depends on the day. And then, of course, the regular health appointments, going back to that routine piece, because I have some chronic health issues, specifically chronic pain management, I need to have regular appointments to keep that pain in check so that I can function as optimally as possible and as pain-free as possible. Next, I need a large block of time to accommodate my brain's hyperfocus. So my brain functions in a capacity where I can and have the ability to hyperfocus quite intensively on topics and projects. That is quite a strength in my current line of business. But there are other things that I need to be able to do. And so honoring the way that my brain needs to function best with the hyperfocus blocks of time, but then also having times where I am doing the admin work or doing the other pieces that need to still happen throughout the course of the day, without it interrupting or distracting or taking away from my focus time. And then committee service work with certain organizations make me more grumpy or more happy, depending on what the organization is, what the current health of that group dynamic is, of the people who are participating. There are some committees I've served on that have been amazing, like brilliant minds, wonderfully giving colleagues, and we've done some great work. And that is rewarding, that is fulfilling, and makes it worth it for me. But realizing that there are other committees that I have been on, and I'm sure that you have been on, where it has been a gigantic waste of time. You feel worse after the meeting. There are just a lot of negative things and not enough positive things coming out of those results. So definitely for me, and I imagine for many of you in this field, as committee work and service work is so closely entwined with our actual career, Just to realize that service work is typically volunteer based, and so we can volunteer to do it, and we can also volunteer ourselves out of it. It is not necessarily something you have to be committed to forever. All right, getting into assessment. Thinking about the prompts, what work doesn't need to be done, more of a it would be nice. So being able to identify that, especially if your brain is like mine, and if somebody asks you to do something, all of those to-dos go into the, well, of course I have to do it column, versus there's the actual required, I need to do it, and then the somebody asked me to do this, if I can get to it, great, it would be nice. Next prompt, what work can wait for more FTE, which FTE is full-time employees. So for so many of us who are working in smaller groups, smaller organizations, and there's just never a big enough staff to tackle absolutely everything. Sometimes identifying those chunks of, okay, this is the core of what needs to happen to continue collection care or access. And then these are projects and activities and responsibilities that can wait until we get more hands on deck. Next prompt, what work is crucial for you to do? So you is emphasized here in terms of what is it that only you can do, and what is it that somebody else can do, whether that is waiting for somebody else, like a new staff member, whether that is waiting for one of your colleagues to wrap up a project so that they have more time or capacity to help you, volunteers, interns, whatever that situation looks like for you. Being able to determine like what is actually a you requirement versus like I can give this to somebody else can be very helpful. Next prompt, look at the time you have available and the work you need to slot in from the to-do list, and does the math make sense? So we sort of touched on this in our reflection period. We're going to touch on this again in the pruning period, but I just really want to highlight for you, especially with the field that we're in, and especially because so many of you have the responsibilities and projects on your plate that equal to more than just one full-time person, is we need to bring ourselves back down to there are only so many hours in the day. There are only so many things you can do. Even though you've been tasked to do this much, you still only have this much time. And so something's going to give, and it will determine it by itself if you're not the one making those active decisions to bring it back down. So does the math make sense? What remains may still be too much for one person. So even if you've gone through the reflection and assessment period, and you've gone through that vetting of like, okay, what is it that I, specifically me, have to do versus would be nice, etc., and it may still be more than for one person. So in which case, the operations of the organization and your role need to be radically reconsidered. You can't do the impossible. Which leads us to pruning. And in this particular area, I know we're mostly focusing on work, but of course we are human beings. So I have this slide that is specified for work, but I also want you to think about that and apply it to your non-work life. So prompts to think about for pruning: what activities, responsibilities, or tasks are not your job? So I am making a distinction here between what on paper is on your position description, like what is your actual job on paper, versus what has been added to your job verbally or just sort of like landed in your lap somehow. Like what is it that is actually your commitment, whether or not it is up to date. And then what activities, responsibilities, or tasks are essential for you to do? So we have all seen those position descriptions, which are for one FTE, but the actual responsibilities and activities, etc., listed on that position description could fill like 3 full-time jobs. So recognizing that and how our field is pretty awful at making realistic job descriptions, you're going to have to go through this extra step of what is actually my job, and then what is actually essential for me to do from what is actually my job, because there is a likelihood that even if you're just going what is actually my job, it's still going to be more than one FTE. And then thinking about what activities, responsibilities, or tasks reasonably fit into that one FTE. So we're taking this one step further. You're looking at your position description for what is actually your job. You're then going through and determining, okay, based on that, what are the things actually on here that are essential for me to do to keep collections healthy, etc. And then further down, of those essential activities of what is actually my job, what is reasonable to fit into one FTE, because you're only one person. So even though there may be duties that are like, it is your job and it's essential, it just literally doesn't fit in the day. The math does not work. And then what can be left behind or distributed elsewhere? So if there are other staff, if you have the ability to advocate for additional people to be added in whatever capacity, that is one option. But for many of us, that's usually not an immediate option, or may not even be considered an option based on fiscal issues or what have you. In that case, if it can't be redistributed, can it be left behind? And you, as the expert in this position, can certainly come up with some very reasonable recommendations of what can be left behind, or even like at least paused. But at this point, you need to start having this conversation with whoever your manager or supervisor is, to start making those decisions intentionally so that you can be successful at your job and what is essential for you to do and what is reasonable for you to do, and what you and your supervisor have decided is going to be paused, left behind, or given to someone else. Okay, applying this to personal. So similar thought prompts, but little different flavor. What activities, responsibilities, or tasks are not contributing to your wellness? And when I'm using wellness, like, yes, are you doing well physically, mentally, emotionally? But taking that one step further for that more holistic concept, like, are you happy? Are you healthy? Are you feeling passionate? Like, are you doing well in your current job? Yes, but also in your current place in life with the decisions you've made, current routine, people you surround yourself with, that kind of thing. Then, what activities, responsibilities, or tasks are essential for you to do? So, depending on how your brain works, and if you like to be someone who's super social and very, very committed to a lot of different things, or the opposite, reassessing what is it that is essential for you to do out of these activities, responsibilities that we tell ourselves that we need or want to do for our life, and what is it that is working for us? What is it that we have to do? What's essential? And then what activities, responsibilities, or tasks reasonably fit into the structure of your life? So if you're a person where you've got a full-time job, you have a commute to and from work, you have health appointments you need to make, or you go to the gym because you need that to help take care of your health. You have children and childcare responsibilities or parent care responsibilities. There are so many commitments in that day, in your week, that sometimes it's impossible to do it all. So can there be some different decisions made, some different intentionality around it that can help you work better? And not in a like brick and mortar work better sense, but you yourself, your life, have that work better. Then, what can be left behind or distributed elsewhere? So, when we're thinking about these things, what can be, maybe you have a partner, maybe in your community or family structure, you have the ability to bring in some sort of teammate for some of these. Perhaps you have the financial ability to bring in help, or if you have parents, etc., being able to have that ability to access support for yourself depending on what those responsibilities are. And then what people, places, and activities are no longer serving you. So we have all been in a place where there have been people that have been exhausting and you feel worse after spending time with them than you do before. In addition to places and activities, because those can have the same effect. You know, if you're on the HOA board as part of a service activity and it is just like ridiculously filled with drama or not well organized, anything that is sucking up your time and your energy more than it should and is doing nothing to help serve you needs to go. Which is starting to lead us into a rethink concept. So I want to encourage you to rethink everything that doesn't feel good to you. And that threshold can be anywhere from I am avoiding this thing, it doesn't feel good, I'm not motivated to do it. So let's rethink those things. And then scale, of course, to like you are emotionally exhausted or you feel worse when you do those things. So the scale is a like I'm avoiding something, let's investigate it, all the way to this is actively hurting me, my stamina, my energy, my mental, emotional well being. We need to rethink this. Next one, radically reconsider your schedule, routines, commitments, and activities. Because we can get so easily locked into, okay, I have to do this, this, and this, and always in this order, I always have to do these activities, it can get really, it is really easy to get sucked into that type of routine and just having everything scheduled out, that we sometimes don't take a moment to rethink what is being scheduled and why we are scheduling it. And so I encourage you to rethink those items, especially if they're items that don't feel good. And then perform major pruning, or if you like thinking about it in collection terms, deaccessioning any of the people, places, and activities that are no longer serving you, that no longer feel good. For a bit of a personal example of rethinking everything, because I can get so easily locked into a routine, um, and because my brain needs a or thrives with a very specific type of setup, my work is scheduled for the times that I work best. And so I will block out times in my calendar for when I'm doing hyper focused project work, and then for when I am at my best when having meetings and doing working collaborative sessions with other people and clients. So I am intentionally scheduling things for when they will work best for me and my brain. I've also removed myself from committees that don't love me the way I love them. I've had the pleasure of serving on committees where the cause I've been very passionate about, but sometimes the team or the organization where that is housed is just not in alignment with where I wish we would be or doing what I wish we would be doing. And so that is normal, that happens, and maybe it's just not for you at that time. I stack my time into blocks so that I can support my brain's need and desire to hyper focus. So that was the example I used in terms of like my work schedule is work for the time I work best, like yes, temporally, and then also using the different time structures for when I can focus and when I'm doing meetings. I don't attend events where I'm the only one, where I am only there out of social obligation. Um, I need to balance this a bit because, of course, as I shared earlier, having social events is exhausting for me. So I do need to balance because socialization can be good and reviving, as well as a great chance to catch up with colleagues or friends. But also, I can get into the habit of just attending because somebody asked, and it is not essential for me to attend. So rethinking, taking a pause, to make sure what I'm attending is actually something that aligns with what I am needing to do or wanting to do, and that supports my energy and what I need for well-being. And then the last point here is that I choose who I work with and how. So this is certainly something born out of starting my own business and being able to say yes or no to whether I work with a client or work with other colleagues. I have to say this is probably one of the best outcomes of me starting my own business is having this autonomy of who I work with and do not work with, and being able to say no to people who are just not a good fit and or are just not respective of my time or expertise. Okay, getting into the protect section here. When we have gone through this assessment, when we're going through the pruning, and when we're going through rethinking everything and how it's working for us or not, once we get to that point where we're like, okay, these are the things that are not working, I'm going to prune or deaccession those, and these are the things that are working, so I want to make sure I am protecting those. And to start out with, especially as you're identifying those people, places, activities, thinking about what your assets are. What are those intangible assets that serve as your limited resources? And for each and every one of us, we have a time asset, we have an energy asset, we have a health asset, and we have a fucks asset. So I'm using fucks here because of the meme that uses the medieval manuscript type drawing, and it says, "Look upon my field of fucks and see that it is barren." And it is essentially a comedic view of, I am so exhausted, I have zero energy to like, I can't even, I cannot care about X because I have no more fucks left. So that is what I mean when I say fucks. It is a pop cultural phenomenon that I know that many of us have seen and definitely resonated with. But essentially what that means is just throughout a combination of things, you can't even, you have no care left in you for whatever it is that's presenting itself, whether it's a person, place, or activity. So 4 limited resources: time, energy, health, and fucks. So don't let people, places, or events suck out your time, energy, or fucks. So, for example, the concept of the emotional vampire, where we have unhealthy friendships where all you're doing is giving and all the person is doing is taking. And that can suck up your time, that can suck up your energy. It's draining and exhausting, and it can certainly impact how many fucks you have towards anything else from that emotional vampire colleague or friend. So, opposite to that, so don't let people undeserving take from your assets, but also protect those assets for the people, places, and activities that boost your overall wellness. So boost your happiness mentally, emotionally, it boosts your physical health. So protecting those things so that you can do these activities that ultimately will help you reinvest in those assets. And then protect your ability and capacity to dedicate to people, places, and activities that you do actually give a fuck about. So for us, when we care about things, we need to be intentional. We need to make sure that we're protecting our assets for activities that help replenish us. And we need to make sure we're protecting those assets for the people, places, and activities that we do actually care about. So remember, if you spend your resources on a person, place, or activity that you don't value, it impacts your ability to engage with the people, places, and activities you do value, because assets they can be replenished, but they are not infinite. So the moment you spend all of your time or your energy assets or your health assets or your fucks assets, there will not be enough until you replenish it. And so when you're caught at that like zero baseline and something comes up that you would love to engage with, you're not going to be able to because you've already spent your assets elsewhere. Getting into fortify, so thinking about how to protect and replenish your assets. So first of all, make sure that you go through the assessment, pruning, and protection pieces that we spoke about earlier in this webinar. Make sure you go through those and that you have those in place, or at least those concepts are familiar and you're starting to apply them to your life. Next, engage in deep rest when your body asks for it. And I have deep rest capitalized here because it's a concept my therapist has shared with me where, we have this saying in our culture that you're someone it's a work hard, play hard mentality. And for many of us, we're too exhausted to play hard. We need to rest hard first. So instead, shifting that concept to, okay, I'm working hard, whether that is in my job or in life, I now need to have some deep rest to help replenish my body when it asks for it. Next, adopt a regular physical and mental health therapies. So, depending on what you have going on, mentally, physically, emotionally, we all have things that we could use some support around. So, whatever that looks like to you in terms of therapies, whether it's physical therapy and massage, or if it's mental health therapy, figure out the areas where you could use support, where you could use some more structured and informed support, and make sure you get that for both your mind and your body. And then find places where you can acquire joy and peace. So, finding those small pockets, whether it is within the workplace or within our field, as well as within our lives, where are those pockets where there is dependable and almost palatable joy and peace. When I do this activity, I feel joy and or peace. When I am with this person, I feel joy and or peace. Joy and peace are both replenishing aspects for us. So in addition to rest, we also need joy and peace to help replenish those assets that we have. So the time, energy, health, and flux assets. So the concept here being you have to earn and accumulate your resources in order to spend them. So you can't spend what you don't have. We don't have credit cards for our resources here. This can be a slow process, so protecting and fortifying your resources are critical here to how you function. And you can't spend what you don't have. Next, invest. So we've talked about some ways to protect and replenish. And now I want us to think proactively in how we can better invest in ourselves in those areas to grow those assets. So I want you to think about upgrading your life with better systems, routines, and tools. For example, I used to be someone who would try and get and use all of like the free or open source tools to not spend any money. So the mentality was don't spend money. But then realizing that the amount of my time and trying to figure things out and troubleshoot, etc., ended up being far more expensive than had I just spent some money and invested in a better tool, which would have saved my time and perhaps in many cases make the project or output even higher quality. So rethinking your systems, why you're doing things, decisions you make, the tools you use, and whether those actually make sense or if it makes sense to do things better, differently, or not at all. Next, cultivate your expertise in areas where you find satisfaction and that make your job easier. So when we are passionate about something, we have the motivation to gain knowledge. We have the motivation to go through challenges when we're working or learning through something. And ultimately, there's satisfaction in that work. Even when we're working through challenges, there's satisfaction there. And when we are able to choose areas that will help make our jobs better or our lives better, then it makes like essentially a double impact. One, you're already enjoying it, but two, once you do make that achievement of taking a class, gaining expertise, maybe you do a workshop, if it helps make your job easier also, then you are actually investing in your assets and doing some protection of them with gaining that knowledge. So multiple benefits there. Next, build your career through specific service that is meaningful to you and in organizations you care about. So, when we are giving our energy, and especially when we're thinking about service, which is a voluntary activity, making sure you're doing that in a way that is impactful and that is not subjecting you to things that are sucking away, like taking away from your assets, your time, energy, health, and fucks. Next, grow your network of peers and trusted colleagues beyond your organization. Now, it is a very small percentage of us that end up staying at one organization throughout the entirety of our career. So, like multiple decades, you are going to have at least a few different places you go to. And so, depending on what it is you're working on, what organization you're at, and where your future may be, gaining colleagues and creating a network of peers, no matter where you're at or where you're moving to next, will be incredibly helpful for you. It'll be immediately helpful for you in the moment if ever you need to crowdsource some sort of answer or troubleshooting something, but it will also have a long-term benefit of helping you feel a part of the community and having a network to tap into for any of your future needs, whether that is finding a new job or meeting people and putting together a panel. Like, opportunities are infinite, and while it does take some time and some socializing to build a network, it does have an investment impact and payoff as you build your career. And then finally, find internal and external allies in causes you care about and build on your affinities. So for us, yes, we're in a normal job, 9 to 5. We have specific things that we do. But if there are areas that we are feeling passionate about, if there, whether that is in your own organization or perhaps field wide, finding allies either in your organization or across the field that feel the same is rewarding, and it's a good connection. But also, as you build those affinities, you're able to pool your resources, you're able to help combine any sort of assets you have, whether the intangible ones we spoke of in terms of like time and energy, or even the tangible ones, where if you're pulling together multiple organizations into a collaborative project, you're going to have more financial assets as well as staff, tools, etc. So building on affinities can be a great opportunity generator, as well as helps you find satisfaction and meaning in the work that you care about. So, personal example of investments for me, and these range anywhere from like somewhat small and silly to like this makes a major impact in my life. But I have a treadmill in our house to save time and increase the likelihood of use. So, again, for me, thinking about what my body needs to function as pain free as possible, which requires movement. So, I will more likely use the treadmill if it is in my garage versus it is somewhere I have to go to the gym, for example. Also, I have an assistant to schedule that helps with project management, helps perform admin work to help keep the firm running, especially now that it's not just me. And so, making a strategic, in this case, financial investment for both myself and the company so that I can focus on the work that it is essential for me to focus on, and other important aspects of the business are looked after. For me, I block out space on my calendar to perform to do items and errands that I would otherwise neglect. So I very much use the tools that I have available to me and find ways to work with my brain in a way that supports my brain and has a better chance of success, that I remember those types of things. So in this case, there are so many good tools out there that you can use to help support your brain in the way that it needs. Another item is I have a go bag. So packing for work trips is fast and easy, and I'm not having anxiety about forgetting something super important for a client on site. And so I can rest assured that I have all the tools I need. And so that one is as simple as just making sure that I have a backpack of duplicate, like cotton gloves, pencils, pencil sharpener, things like that. So I realize not all of you do client on sites, but if there's something similar, then it just as simple as like having a like it is always ready to go, you can take it with you is tremendously helpful. I have a ready-made template for just various different work projects that we do at this firm. And while every client and project is different, there's the bones there to help lead us through and make consistently quality products for the clients and without having to recreate the wheel every time, at least in terms of outline. And then finally, I work with people and on projects that deliver profound satisfaction. So while there is an extreme amount of demand on my time and energy and health and fucks, because I am making, hopefully for the most part, good decisions and am being very intentional with who I work with, what I work on, I am able to get a tremendous amount of satisfaction out of what is very, could be a very demanding job. So to sort of wrap this all up and to compare it to something that is a familiar concept for us in the museum and archives field especially, I want to have you think about it as creating a collecting mission for your life. So what I mean by that is I want you to identify and assess what you value the most and think of it like a collecting mission. With that collecting mission, as we do when we're in our collection, is we're going to weigh our decisions and investment and other items against that collecting mission to determine whether it makes sense for us to do X, Y, and Z, to take whichever collection. And so in this case, the collecting mission, AKA our values. We need to weigh decisions, things that we do and commit ourselves to against our values to make sure that we are in alignment and that it's a fit. And with that, we need to periodically reassess our collecting mission and your actual collection, which is your life there, to make sure you're in alignment. So as we move forward, much as with museums and archives, there's usually a need to update the collecting mission to reflect current priorities, etc. We need to do that periodically throughout our life as well. And then deaccession. So we're going to use that collecting mission before we take things on, before we accession and a person, place, or activity. We are also going to deaccession against that collecting mission. So to cut out or decide against a person, place, or activity, for example, that doesn't support our collecting mission, aka our values. So we're getting into the question period. I do have a question that was submitted earlier that we will start with. The question here is, I would love to hear how others tackle the mammoth to-do list left over from the previous year. I'm tackling the work of about 2+ people, and I'm desperate for a second employee. Any tips or tricks from others to prioritize and manage the to-do list would be appreciated greatly. So if you have suggestions or tips, please feel free to put them in the chat to have captured for this one. I do have some suggestions of my own for this particular question. So I would say if the to-do item has languished on the list for more than a few months, I'm going to ask you if it is actually worth doing. Because if it's waited that long, why are we hanging on to it? Most of the time, I find, at least for me, the items that languish on the to-do list is because somebody asked me to do something and it wasn't important and it wasn't something that I myself had or needed to do. So when you're looking at your to-do list, the things that tend to languish there will fall in one or more of those camps of when we were doing reflection and assessment. And so I'm going to challenge you and ask you, if it's been there for a while, is it actually worth doing, or do we just feel like we're obligated to do it? Next, what work can wait or be handed to someone else? So like if it's waited on your to-do list for a while, can it wait some more? Like if you've determined, yes, it is important to eventually do, that it'll still stay on the to-do list, can some, like one of your other colleagues help out and handle it? Or can it wait until you have more time and capacity to do it? Next, for the items on your to-do list that are important, they are essential for you specifically to do. So again, thinking through those prompts from earlier on our assessment piece, if it turns out that you yourself need to do it and prioritize it, I recommend scheduling a regular time for you to do those types of activities. For me, some of the things that languish on the to-do list are actually really simple. I just need like 10 or 15 minutes to get it done. But because it's not typically as important or critical, it tends to stay on there longer. And because my brain likes to hyper focus versus be task oriented, I would much rather dive into 4 hours of project work than do like an hour of admin work. So having that time in my schedule, at least weekly, to do some of those things has been helpful for me. And then consider dedicating one intensive period of time to help close out the to-do items. So if you've decided that the to-do items should stay and that yes, you're the one specifically that needs to do them, then in order to get those knocked out and to stop tormenting you by being on the to-do list perpetually, actually dedicate or carve out a day where nobody interrupts you, where it's not superseded by anything, and just try and get as many of those items done as possible. Sometimes having those days like once a month or even once a quarter can be tremendously helpful in clearing out those pesky to-do items. Great question. So, resources to share with you, and then we'll leave the questions slide up a little bit longer for those in the chat to continue doing question and answer. There are a few books I read over the last year that speak to aspects of what topics we covered today. And so I wanted to share these with you, and in case it is helpful, and if in case books is something that helps your brain sort of replenish and invest in yourself. So, Daring Greatly: How the Courage to Be Vulnerable Transforms the Way We Live, Love, Parent, and Lead by Brene Brown. Essentialism, and you'll notice in this exercise we used the concept of is it essential for you to do kind of thing. This book, Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less by Greg McKeown, is very helpful. And I'm an audiobooks person for for brain and body reasons. I'm an audiobooks person, and this is like a really quick read. It's maybe 6 hours of listen content, so a good, nice, like snack size one. Next, the book Give and Take by Adam Grant. While these particular concepts aren't a direct application, I have found this book very helpful in framing my thinking about people and our relationships, both in a work and personal setting, and the concept of who is a giver, who is a taker, and who is a hybrid. And there's pros and cons to all of them, and how to function with that framework in mind with these people. So I encourage you to think about that if people is one of the areas where you're struggling with these concepts. Another book, Grit: The Power of Passion and Perseverance by Angela Duckworth. This particular one, its focus and how it is applicable to this particular webinar is in its analysis of people who are going through challenges, whether taken on voluntarily or intentionally, or it just happened and there was not a decision to have to go through something challenging. Regardless, the psychology of the people who are able to succeed and be able to survive that kind of thing and have wellness around it, the psychology around it is fascinating. So if that is something that interests your brain, I recommend that book. Then Lead from the Outside: How to Build Your Future and Make Real Change by Stacey Abrams. Now, of course, this is a bit autobiographical for Stacey Abrams, and she is a political figure, and it does have that political focus on it. But similarly, it's elements of challenges, both in a career and personally, and how to navigate your way through frameworks and structures that are sometimes put upon by ourselves internally, as well as what we experience externally. And then finally, Professional Troublemaker, the Fear Fighter Manual by Levi Ajaya Jones. This particular one, the concepts that I find in here applicable to this webinar is the concept of what it means to be a troublemaker, um, and in a motivational and in a way you can achieve things. So sort of disruptive thinking, whether that is thinking about how we approach things, how we interact with the world, some of the paradigm shifts and different framework of thinking about those things I found very helpful from this book. And then webinar wise, depending on the aspects of this webinar that spoke the most to you, the following webinars I think may be of interest. So we have the Ask Me Anything Career Edition, which I think there was 20 or so questions all over the map, but quite a few of them about sort of the mental, emotional aspects of the work that we do and how to navigate things that are maybe not healthy in not from our own doing, but more structurally from our organization. So you may find this helpful. We also did, I think it was just last month, Burnt Out in Glam World, which was one of the most highly registered for and attended webinars, which is lovely. Thank you. I'm glad the content is helpful, but also I am so sorry to see just how applicable and helpful the content was needed. I'm sorry to see how many of us are feeling so burnt out, but if that's what you're feeling and you haven't seen that webinar yet, I do recommend it. We also have Hello Imposter. So from the aspects of more career confidence and figuring out what it is that we really want to do, what we're really good at, I think those aspects from that webinar may be helpful. And then purely just from like an asset, time management, support your brain sort of perspective, we do have a project management for collection managers webinar that goes over strategies as well as the tool that we use here at Relicura to help manage our projects. So here's our new contact info. You're welcome to email me at rachel@relicura.com. Website has changed over to, of course, to relicura.com. And please, I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn if we haven't already. And with that, we're going to end with the question. Oh, well, first, thank you for attending the webinar. Now we're going to end with the question slide. We'll leave this up for a few more minutes as we wrap things up, but thank you so much for attending this webinar, and I wish you a happy, healthy, and hopefully peaceful next year in 2023. And I'll see you next month. Thanks.